We're live. Hello, welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour. I am Brandon Testers and I'm a licensed therapist, but this is not therapy for very, very many reasons. This is instead just an open conversation. Usually Margaret Schaus is with me. Unfortunately, today she's not feeling well, so she won't be with us today. But I'm glad to be with you all. This is not therapy for many reasons. It's just an open conversation, and like any other conversation, the things that I say and that I do will impact what you think and feel and what you say or do next. And the things that you say or do will impact what I think and feel and say or do next. In this case, however, obviously it's not like a regular in-person conversation because you all can see and hear me, but I can't see or hear you. So I'm just doing my best to make my guesses about who you are and what you're thinking, how I'm impacting you, what you're interested in. For those of you who are willing and able to participate in the chat by entering comments that I'll be able to read, I appreciate that because it gives me a lot more information on which to base those guesses. I do my best to read out those comments as they come in because we are streaming on 3 different platforms simultaneously. There's Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And each of you will only see comments which were entered on the platform that you're on. So if you're on Facebook, you'll see what people wrote on Facebook, but not on the other 2. So I try to read them out to keep them all so that we're all on the same page. I work with a private therapy and coaching practice called Effective Artistry. Our office is located in Northbrook, Illinois. We do individual, couples, family, and group therapy with people in the states of Illinois and Wisconsin, either in person at our office here in Northbrook or remotely. We also work with some coaches who can work with people all over the world via the internet. All of the coaches that work with us are executive functioning coaches, but each of them has their own additional specialties as well. There's business and professional coaching, parent coaching, and creativity artists coaching. I never usually say this, but I'll say, I guess, that like if you are interested in any of that, please reach out to us. You can go to our website at effectiveartistry.com or just email us at admin@effectiveartistry.com. I should probably say that generally. I wonder if we have links. I don't even know. I don't do a great job with trying to like optimize all of this because anybody who's here is probably aware it's not like you found this through, I don't know, some ads or backlinking or like active promotion. However you found it. Honestly, I don't know for most of you. I don't know how you find this, but it's always fun. But that includes the like, I don't know, I think and hope that there's probably links to our website and stuff on the YouTube channel or the Twitch channel or Facebook page. Something that might be worth looking into, I suppose. I've been mentioning this for the last several weeks, but we are still in the process of moving and rearranging things. And so I apologize for I know the lighting is not the greatest. I'm sitting in front of a window and it's kind of causing issues with, looks like I'm sitting in front of like, I don't know, a glowing white wall. I'm putting my face in darkness. Still work to be done on getting everything adjusted properly, but hopefully you all can see me and hear me all right. If not, please let me know in the comments. For those of you who are willing and able to participate in the chat, thought it was your halo, yeah. Please don't hesitate. This, I mean, especially today with it being just me, but even when Margaret is here or when someone else is with me, this is just an open conversation. We'll go where we go. I'll start by talking about whatever is on my mind or whatever's prompted. But if you have something to say, a question to ask, a topic to bring up, whatever, please put it out there. Don't worry about whether or not it's like on topic or whether other people might think that it's useful or anything like that. Just put it out there and we'll go where we go. Honestly, I don't think this is true. Like logically, I'm pretty sure this is not true, but generally how I think about this whole thing is that every week we have, 1 or 2 people here because there's something going on that those people want to get some conversation or some thoughts about, and that it rotates out, different people come on different weeks when something's going on. There's much evidence to suggest that that is not the case, but that's how I think of it because I'm just mostly aware of whoever it is that's entering things into the chat, right? Everything else is just pure speculation and guesswork. So if it's of interest to you or feels relevant or worth saying to you, please put it out there. Don't put this extra level of scrutiny on your own impulses to be like, well, but would this take time away from what other people might be interested in? Love the shout out to coaching. Say more about what coaching can do for clients. So that comment is from Fritz Tessers, who is one of the coaches that works with us. He's also my father. When I was young, he's been working in various forms of coaching, business coaching, professional coaching for, I don't know, 3 decades or so now. So some of my early interest in these topics, I guess, yay, being your father. I mean, yeah. Because I didn't grow up like intending to be a therapist or intending to be a coach. I always wanted to be a writer, which I still enjoy writing and intend to do more. And he still doesn't know what he's doing. Well, yeah, it's true. He's my father and he still doesn't know what he's doing. And I don't know what I'm doing. And none of us do. We're just doing our best. And it's Fajr. Yeah, I wanted to be an artist, primarily a writer, and then acting also, and music. I'm a vocalist. I play guitar, not incredibly well, but well enough to write some songs. I was in bands and whatever. So it wasn't always my intention to do this, but even when it wasn't my intention to do this work, this way of thinking about things was already something that had been developed. I remember being 11 years old and having conversations with my father about what he will often refer to as human performance, right? Talking about the nature of consciousness and how people get the ideas that they do and so on. Well enough to soothe kids too. Not sure what that's in reference to. Maybe just that we're all doing our best. Now he was in the business world. He started as a salesperson and then a sales trainer, and then kind of went that route in business and professional coaching, sales coaching especially, and did it in various forms for a long time. I went guitar skills. My guitar skills are well enough to soothe kids. Sure. I went my own path, which is circuitous and I think relatively interesting, although I don't talk about it a lot. I think people generally would find it interesting. But suffice to say for now, at least, that it ended up with me deciding to go back to school to become a therapist. What? I'm 40 now. I would have been about 26 or so 14 years ago, maybe 13 years ago. Circuitous is a family tradition. And then the nature of my work as a therapist, like there's a famous quote. I'm blanking on where it's from. It's from a book about how to be happy, but I can't remember what it's called. It might even be called How to Be Happy. But the famous quote of wherever you go, there you are, right? That whoever you are and the things that you bring with you, let's keep it at least at the beginning as simple as like your body, your physicality, right? That's with you all the time, wherever you go, whatever you do. And then obviously there's more than just that. And that's where we get into some like speculation and labeling things in hypothetical ways about personality and thoughts and beliefs and values, like all things that obviously there's something there that we're trying to get at and refer to, but exactly how you break it down and what's the most accurate or useful ways to talk about it varies. There are different attempts at that. But that stuff comes with you wherever you go to, right? So when I was focused on acting and when I was focused on writing and when I was focused on what at the time I called called academic coaching, which I now would refer to as executive functioning coaching. When I first started doing that, it was with students exclusively originally. Whether that's as a therapist, like the things that I think, the lens that I have, the ways in which I evaluate things, they come with me and get applied to whatever I'm doing. So this way of evaluating people and what they do and why and how we feel and why and what are the systems and what are the structures, that's something that I can't remember a time when I wasn't thinking about those things. And Fritz, my father, was a big part of that. That, I remember having conversations with him about these kinds of things long, long ago. So I ended up starting this practice, Effective Artistry, about 5 years ago, and decided at the beginning of that to start it with two divisions, I guess, wings, whatever, to have therapists and also to have coaches for various reasons. There's things that therapy can do and therapists can do that's really beneficial, but it's also there's a high bar for people to become therapists in terms of not just like learning and education and practice and whatever, but in terms of like the financial resources that are required to be able to spend that amount of time and so on. And there are many people who can be very helpful, as I think of myself having been before I became a therapist, without being therapists. And there are forms for that, and there's coaching. And there are also people who really benefit from therapy, and there are people who benefit from coaching, and there's differences, some of which are logistical and some of which are about what a person is dealing with or how they go about things. So I wanted to have both of those things. And we've been through various iterations, and we've been, as a general thing, growing. More and more therapists and coaches have been joining. Sometimes people leave, but a lot more people joining than we've lost along the way. And then, I don't know, a few months ago, like July, August this year, maybe almost 5 years after having started the practice, Fritz and I sat down and talked about things and decided to have him become part of what we're doing here as well. So I had him join up as one of our coaches, bringing his skills in career coaching, professional coaching, a lens generally that I would think of as or describe as very like professionally oriented in coaching work. A lot about productivity, especially productivity in the professional environment or as related to professional endeavors, accountability, systems, that kind of thing. And then learning more and more as we go along about the particular way in which we at Effective Artistry, how we approach executive functioning and those kinds of things. Of course, his views already align with that to a large extent, because a lot of my views were formed in conversation with him over the years. But yeah, so that's a brief overview story of how Fritz came to be. I don't usually, by the way, call him Fritz personally. I call him Dad, always have, but in the professional environment, I call him Fritz because it feels weird to refer to him as Dad or my dad when talking to like other employees or his supervisor or whatever. And same here. I'm not trying to hide from the fact that he's my father. I think that's pretty obvious, and I always make a point of saying that because I don't think that's I was going to say, I don't think that's a black mark. And in fact, it's the opposite. I think that's quite like to me, I think credit adds to his credibility. Fajer. Yeah, so he's one of our coaches. He does executive functioning coaching work as well as business coaching. And as part of him, it's a badge of success in my editor being referred to as Dad. I wonder if editor was supposed to be estimation, maybe, not autocorrect. What was I going to say there? World. Badge of success in my world being referred to as Dad. Now I lost it again. Oh, yeah. As part of him joining Effective Artistry, that also means that we arranged for him to be charging the same fees that the rest of the coaches at Effective Artistry do, which is significantly lower than used to be charged for his coaching services, and which I appreciate him not only being willing to do, but also being eager and excited about this, doing the work in this way where we're optimizing to make it as accessible as possible to as many people as possible, while still providing like sustainability for the people doing the work, rather than, as has been the case in most of the rest of his career, where he's worked for companies that have prioritized maximizing profit. So that is a nice opportunity or benefit or whatever for the people that work with him, is that they get to work with him now at a much lower rate than they would have had to pay a long time ago, earlier in his career. I also think the work that he does is better at this point, but I kind of would have to believe that, since I'm talking about, like, I am now training him and supporting him in the work, so modifying what he's done to come more in line with what we talk about all the time. So there you go. That was the prompt from Fritz. Talk more about coaching. I guess I talked more about you specifically as a coach rather than about coaching. But feel free to prompt me more, or anybody else to prompt me. Totally agree that it's Mo Betta. There's all this, like, let's talk about jargon for a second unless I get prompted to go in a different direction. But, like, jargon, like all language, is useful, it serves a purpose. And like all tools, they often get used for things that was not the purpose that they were originally intended for, right? So jargon gets developed because if two people who are working on something that's very niche, right, like something that the vast majority of people don't have very much awareness of, or only a very light, superficial awareness of it, when you're working on it and getting into it deep, there are concepts that come up that, like, modern, like, common language doesn't really describe well, and so you have to use a lot of language to describe something. Me trying to think. So, like, a term like over-indexing is a term that computer programmers, people who do things related to coding, will often use. And obviously, any of these terms, whatever the concept is that the jargon refers to, there's other ways to refer to those things without using the jargon. Otherwise, we couldn't have come up with those words in the first place, right? So we're going to use over-indexing as the example here. And what over-indexing means is when you're giving greater weight to something than it actually merits. Meaning, like, as a brief, if you want to, like, mathematically find the average of 5 different values, you add those 5 values together and then you divide the result by 5, and that gives you the mean, the average that we call the mean. If we brought the top values down and the lowest values up until they all meet at the same, what would that number be? So over-indexing in that case would be like, instead of adding those 5 values together and dividing the result by 5, it would be like adding the first 4 values and then taking the 5th value and adding it on 10 times, and then just dividing the result by 14. So the average now is very highly skewed by that one that got treated as though it was 10 times as important as it really is. Now, that's a concept that, like, can be useful in many scenarios, and there are different ways of referring to that. But especially when it comes to coding, where a lot of what's happening in coding is, writing programs that get computers to take information from one place, do something with that information, and then output something in return. It's a relatively common problem then, that what's happening is, in the getting the information, we're focusing too much on a certain type of information or information from a certain location in a way that impacts what's coming out on the other side in a way that we don't like. And so being able to refer to that as over-indexing, it's a lot faster and a lot easier than having to describe every time, like, I think that what's going on here is that you're treating this piece of information as though it has greater weight or is worth more than it actually is. That's just annoying to say over and over, right? Think of abbreviations. Same thing. Sometimes if a word is really long or a phrase is really long, or acronyms that are a version of abbreviations, right? We don't say, like, that's a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent. We say that's an FBI agent. I don't know why that's the first acronym that popped into my mind. That we can talk about STEM rather than, like, the sciences, technology, engineering, and maths. It's about making language efficient. And it's not worth doing when you don't use that concept or reference that concept very often. It's not worth going through the effort of adding additional language into your vocabulary and using it, unless it's something that comes up a lot. So that's when we're talking about jargon, we're talking about language that is specific to like a particular profession or a set of tasks specifically, where like if you're doing this niche thing, then being able to communicate with and with others and understand, be aware of and conceptualize this concept in a much more efficient, easily identifiable way is worth doing. It just happens kind of automatically, right? If nothing else, we come up with acronyms and then we say those acronyms. What's like NASA, right? We don't say NASA, we say NASA. We don't say STEM, we say STEM. It just kind of happens. Now, obviously, people are generally aware, I think, that sometimes people use jargon for a different reason, where the attempt is not to communicate about something quickly and easily and efficiently, but rather to demonstrate possessing some information that someone else doesn't have. In other words, if I use a piece of jargon with someone that I don't think knows or uses that word, then obviously I'm not using it to try and communicate with them. At least I'm not using it in order to communicate the meaning of that word. So instead, what I'm doing is I'm using it to communicate to them that I possess information or expertise that they do not. Now, sometimes it's that. Sometimes people do, unfortunately, use words to try and show off, to be like, look at what I know and what words I use, when I actively believe that you don't use these words or know or understand these concepts, and I am just trying to like gain status over you or make you think of me as, having a more valuable opinion than you in this regard. Sometimes people are doing it with someone when they like actively believe that the other person does know and use that terminology. I'm using jargon with someone that I think also uses that same jargon. And sometimes we're wrong about that. So if you're using jargon with me and I don't speak it, or I don't have that particular piece of jargon, I might assume that you're trying to do that other thing where you're trying to show off or make me feel dumb or like your opinion is more valuable than mine. Even though in this case, what you're actually doing is just the mistake of you thought that I used that term too and you were wrong. Sometimes I don't feel that way. Sometimes I do, right? And generally what's best is if I just say like, I'm not sure what that means or what do you mean by that? Because that will help me to know, like, were you doing that on purpose? Were you purposely using a term, not 100% all the time, but it gives me more information to assess, were you purposely using a term that you thought I wouldn't know to demonstrate value or whatever? Or were you genuinely trying to communicate something to me and just didn't realize? Now, there's also times where it's not that I actively think that you know the term. Sometimes it's just a part of how we speak, right? We don't choose every word we use, things just come out automatically. And I didn't actively consider whether or not the other person might know the term. It just came out. So it's not that I made a mistake of thinking that they knew it when they didn't, but it's also not that I thought they didn't know it and I'm doing it on purpose either way. These things happen, and in particular that one of someone trying to show off or increase their status, demonstrate that their opinion is, by the way, a lot of the time when people are doing that, it's not to say that my opinion is more valuable than yours, that I'm more worth listening than you are, or more worth listening to than you are. A lot of the time it's not comparative in that way. It's just, I want you to think that my opinion is worth listening to, that I am an interesting person or have some thoughts that might be worth your consideration. I'm not intending or even thinking of it as like, if I do this, it'll make you feel dumb or make you think that I think that you're dumb. Sometimes it's just, I think that you're so great or smart or whatever, that I'm worried you don't think that I'm as smart as you or worth listening to. And so I'm trying to demonstrate how smart I am or how worth listening to I am. And sometimes, again, I'm wrong about that, right? You already think I'm smart. And so by trying to demonstrate to you that I'm smart, it comes across to you as though I'm just trying to brag and show off. That's all. Because that happens, and because when that happens, it is such an unpleasant experience, we take note of it, right? It's not always an unpleasant experience when someone uses a term you don't know. Oftentimes you just ask what it means. Sometimes you figure it out through context, whatever. Sometimes, a lot of the time you just don't even notice it or ignore it and it doesn't really matter. But there are times where someone uses a term you don't know and it feels like they're proving that they are worth more than you are. or trying to prove that they're, and it might feel like other people are now assessing them as being worth more than you are, or even you yourself are like, oh man, I don't know, you feel insecure as a result of it. When that happens, it's very unpleasant, and with all unpleasant things, we're more likely to notice it, we're more likely to remember it, and we're more likely to be vigilant about it, meaning on the lookout for it happening again, right? And that does mean, like, if I have been attacked by someone who followed me down a street, for a block or so, and then they hit me from behind and beat me up, then of course in the future, whenever people are walking behind me, I'm more likely to be watching out and worried about whether that person is planning to attack me. That makes sense. It's happened to me once. I have reason to think that I'm not jumping straight to anyone who's walking behind me is going to attack me, but I do think I'm behaving as though it is worth paying more attention than I used to like, is that person potentially going to attack me? That makes sense. It does also mean that I'm more likely to treat people who are not planning to attack me, but are just walking behind me. I'm more likely to interpret them or interact with them as though they are planning to attack me. I'm more likely to see an attack where it doesn't exist. Again, that still makes sense, because the point here is better to see a potential attack where there isn't one than to fail to see a potential attack where there is one, right? We learn through these experiences, not always cognitively or consciously. Sometimes, a lot of what we're talking about when we talk about trauma is that kind of learning. Our body, our non-conscious processes, our nervous system, whatever you want to say, has adapted, modified in response to something bad that happened, and is adapted in such a way where we're going to be more on the lookout for something like that happening again, so that we can prevent it from happening. We can catch signs of the potential that it might happen earlier and do things that make it less likely to happen, or protect ourselves from the unfortunate or painful consequences of it happening. But as a part of that, what that means is we're going to be evaluating whether somebody else or some situation might be headed that way more strictly. We're going to be more on guard, more on our toes. So back when it comes to this jargon thing, that means that when people use jargon, we're more likely to interpret it as though what they're doing is trying to belittle us or shame us or gain status over us, or make us feel bad or try to control us. Because it does sometimes happen, we're more likely to see it that way. Does that mean that the majority of the time that people use terms we don't know, that's what's happening? No, of course not. Not at all. I don't think we could measure that in any kind of laboratory study kind of a way. But I feel very confident in saying that that's not how humans interact with each other, that the majority of the time we're angling for status or trying to belittle other people. It happens, but it's not the most common thing that happens. When you're talking to a child, your own child or whatever, and you use a word that they don't know, you're not doing it to make them feel small or to lord over them generally. Sometimes people do, but generally that's not why. For the most part, you're just not considering whether the other person might know that word or not. I started talking about jargon because I was going to use a word that is jargon, and I long ago forgot what that word was and why why I was going to use it. I remember now. Because what I was going to talk about is what we would call paradigms or worldviews. There's a lot of words to kind of get at this concept, but mostly those words are not in common usage, and mostly they're academic jargon, right? Ontology is a word that people in certain academic fields are very familiar with that term and use it quite a bit. And outside of those fields, nobody knows what it means. It just sounds real smart. And that's a lot of what we identify as sounding real smart, is when somebody uses a term that we don't know, but whatever it is about the person or the context or the way in which the term was used does indicate to us, we get a sense that it does have a meaning. It's not just made up gibberish where they made a mistake in what they said. We parse it, we interpret it as, that's a real term that refers to a real thing, but I don't know what it is. Other times people will say things where I'm I have no idea what that is, but I don't interpret it as that's a real term that refers to important and interesting things. I'll just be that's a nonsense phrase that means nothing, right? If someone's skibbity bop, I'm not oh, what the I don't know what that means. What is that? I'm like, no, that's just sounds, you know. So I was going to talk about this paradigm thing, this worldview thing. The thing that I think personally that is mostly what we're talking about when we talk about personality or even psychology. Like generally when people are talking about someone else's or their own personality or someone's psychology, mostly we're talking about what could also be thought of as a worldview. Meaning just that, like, as we were just talking about the specific application there with jargon, this is true of everything. We perceive things. We get sense data, you know, we see or hear or taste or smell or touch or whatever. But then we don't just get the raw data. That data is filtered through some non-conscious but also non-physical process that categorizes it, right? We look and we see a bus. We don't see, you know, this color here and that distance and this shade here and whatever. It's not just the raw visual data. That visual data is processed, and then what we consciously notice is like there's a bus. And obviously there are processes is the word. I was trying to find a different word, but there are processes that determine that construct these things over time. You know, that I might look at something and just register it as a bus, and somebody else might look at it and register it as a car or a vehicle or a gorilla or whatever, right? There are things that happen that result in us perceiving things in different ways. In my office, we constantly say things like, "Are you planning to do a 15162?" Possibly, but I thought a 15186 might be more appropriate given the controversy. Okay, but remember to look out for AB 130. Did you send the AB 52 notices yet? Yeah. That's a great example. And like, I don't know if this is the case with you, but when I hear stuff like that, that immediately rings to me as like, this is a very large organization, like a lot of bureaucracy involved. If the organization itself isn't super large, they're working closely with other very large organizations. That's where you get like a million different forms and acronyms and whatever. And that's why I'm a coach. That's from Fritz. I'm not sure what's the that there. What's why you're a coach. And yeah, like there's all kinds of jokes about it, but because there's a general awareness of like, when you're in an organization, and what that means is you are interacting with, communicating with other people in ways that are like meaningfully relevant, right? We're engaged in some collaborative endeavor. Collaborative meaning like the prefix of, you know, together, and labor, work. We're working together. There's something that if you and I are collaborating, there's something that each of us is trying to accomplish, and we're trying to accomplish that by I do some pieces that help with it and you do some pieces that help with it, which means we have to communicate about what pieces you're doing and what pieces I'm doing. And whatever you end up doing in your parts of the work is likely going to affect what I need to do on my part and vice versa. So we have to communicate a lot. We do a lot of work involving state law. Yeah. Legal code is very, very jargonistic, I guess. For the same reason that like aerospace technology is full of jargon. It's because by the nature of what legal code is, the fact that it is something that like applies to all people within whatever region that those laws have jurisdiction or in which they apply, whether those people are aware of it or not, and that we like it's structured in such a way that there are consequences to following the law or not following the law. And I don't just mean like criminal, although I know that's probably where people mostly go first. But I mean like, you know, if two people, so back to collaborating, if the two of us are working on something together and, you know, I'm doing things that rely on you doing certain things and you're doing things that rely on me, whatever, optimally, ideally, we're communicating well, we are actually on the same page and we're communicating in good faith, and we can accomplish things together that either we couldn't have accomplished individually. I couldn't have accomplished alone, or you couldn't have accomplished alone. Or if we could have, it's still, we accomplish it much more efficiently and likely in a better way, even, and on top of it being more efficient, we get to better results as well. That's the ideal, right? But the more people we loop in, the more problems start to arise. And those problems generally fall under one of two categories. One is just miscommunication. We're still all communicating with each other in good faith, but I made some assumption about what you meant by something that is different than what you actually meant, or vice versa. Or I didn't think that something I'm doing was relevant for you to know about, but it turns out it would have been relevant. So I didn't tell you, and that caused the problem, or whatever. Another category of problems is when people are not operating in good faith. And that's a big part of what like legal code gets involved into, is a social contract at scale, right? If you have a sibling and you're growing up together and one of you doesn't follow through on a promise you made to the other person, that's something that there are mechanisms to handle that within just the relationship itself. The two of you can work it out, or a parent or another adult can get involved in some way. It can be resolved because there's a relationship there. There's an intrinsic, like, how we think about and feel about and interact with each other is going to impact us tomorrow and the next day and for the next several years. So we're very highly incentivized to make sure that we're able to resolve this and get to a place where we can work with one another. But as we scale up, and now say I'm working with somebody that I've never met before and our lives are not entwined, and at the end of this project, or if they walk away from it or I walk away from whatever, we might never interact with each other again. Now there's no incentive for us to operate in good faith with one another, other than that we actually want to accomplish what we're doing, and that there is a default human incentive to communicate in good faith and like have other people like us and be good people, whatever you want to parse it as. This idea that like doing our best to stick to to communicate what we mean as clearly as we're able and authentically and truthfully, there is built-in incentive for that. But there's also plenty of incentive to not do that, or even to intentionally do the opposite, to lie or mislead. So when it's that like, I've never met you before, you've never met me before, our only interaction is this collaborative endeavor, then the chance that somebody is going to be operating in bad faith increases. The chance that like they are not intending to do what they say and they're just trying to get you to do things that will benefit them, whatever. So as we scale up, that's one of the downsides of it, and one of the things that we do as societies to try to rein that in as much as we can is legal codes, where like we invest the authority in people. We agree to a social contract where we say like some people have the authority to do X, Y, or Z, whatever those things are that the legal code allows for, whether that's criminal things like punishment. And I should say that like this is not to say that the way that it is currently done is optimal. Because I certainly don't think that it is. I don't think that anybody thinks that it is. We all have different ideas about what changes would be better. But just the purpose of the function that it serves, what we're attempting to do here. Because there are, if two people sign a contract and one of those people violates that contract, then outside of criminal law, there's legal code that allows for like, okay, well now you have to give me lots of money or whatever, right? We can sue people, things like that. So it's one of the ways in which we try to limit the downsides of a larger scaled society. And there are a lot of intrinsic benefits to a larger scale society. The larger the scale of a group of people, the more we can all specialize. If there's two of us trying to make our way through this world, like neither of us can really afford to spend any of our time on anything other than like the basics. We got to make sure that we're getting enough food and shelter and water and whatever to survive. But if there's 1,000 of us and we we have some systems or processes in place that allow for 10 of us to generate all the water that everybody else needs, or the food then other people can spend their time on things, right? So that's part of how this collaboration, then innovation, efficiency increases, is, especially with our academic structure, the nature of how we do academia, there are people who've dedicated their entire lives to just understanding one small part of a specific niche area of a field, that are able to then innovate, add to the sum total of human knowledge, right? That if I have a plumbing issue, I can contact somebody who knows, who spends their whole day and their whole professional life working on those kinds of issues, instead of me having to figure it out on my own, even though I'm only going to do it once in a great while, hopefully, right? Same thing for therapists, same thing for coaches, that we specialize in certain things. It's not to say that what we do isn't something that anybody else could theoretically, under the right circumstances or given the right resources or whatever, could do. It's just we do it more efficiently because we spend our time, our lives dedicated to it, thinking about it, engaging with it, right? I don't know. I think this all makes sense. I'm not confident that I'm giving like the nuanced detail that I'm trying to give, but that's all right. So all this stuff adds up to what we could call a worldview, or a lens, or we can break different parts of this worldview into different pieces and refer to specific frameworks or paradigms or whatever. It just means that if you and I are sitting right next to each other and we look at the same thing, hear the same thing, we're observing the same thing, you're going to have different thoughts and feelings in response to that, different perceptions of that than I do. And then our impulses or the actions, the behavior that we take in response to that is going to be different. So even if we observed it, perceived it in the same way, our responses would still be different. But on top of the fact that our responses are different, our observation is also different, which is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, and I think is important, or at least potentially helpful for people to be aware of, is that we tend to assume that if two different people respond differently, that we responded differently to the same thing. You and I saw the same movie, I just liked it, you didn't like it. When in reality, no, we noticed different parts and different things in different ways. And even when we noticed the same things, we perceived them in different ways, right? We have all kinds of like studies and stuff that show this, but it's also relatively self-evident, like everybody experiences this. Think about two fans of sports teams that are playing against each other, right? I like one team, you like the opposing team. And then a referee penalizes a player for something, right? If it's a player on the team I root for, I'm more likely to view that, not like make it up or whatever, but genuinely be like, I think that was a bad call, or like, that's ticky-tack or whatever, where the person who's rooting for the other team is more likely to be like, no, that seemed pretty clear-cut to me. But switch the team and we'd switch the responses too. So there tends to be this thought that we're seeing the same thing, even as I use that example, and that therefore the fact that I'm saying like, I think that was a bad call and you're saying it was a good call is not uttered in good faith. That like, when you're saying it was a good call, that I saw exactly what you saw, but am denying it because I don't want it to be true. I think that was a bad call because I am incentivized for it to be a bad call, not because I actually perceived what happened as being a bad call. But the perception is different. We notice different things. If nothing else, even if perception wasn't an issue, we're getting it from a different angle, a different, like literally physically, we're seeing different angles of things or hearing slightly different volumes of things. For the most part, obviously, I don't think that those are like huge and noticeable changes. But just pointing out that even if we were going to act like perception, the stuff that happens after sensation, even if we were going to pretend like that's all the same, it still would result in different things because we'd be physically getting different senses. it's clear, even if we have studied language on a deeper level than most, we don't communicate as clearly as we think we are, at least not until we confirm that we both understand the same meaning of a word. Yeah, so study, I mean, I guess that means a lot of things, but study, generally, we're talking about like some kind of cognitive approach to learning. Um, Not that we never mean like experiential things when we're talking about study, but generally not. And it's useful, but it's just one element of what we do. And yes, therapists and coaches are, our expertise is in communication. We have, in addition to that, we have various different things that we are more knowledgeable about than people generally are, right? Like think of it as if there's two different, well, doctors. I don't want to use doctors because people think of therapy as like as though it is the same as the field of medicine, or like we're similar to doctors and we're not. Let me try a different thing. All right, teaching, right? That there's a term, there's a jargon term, right? It's not a term that almost anybody's going to know, called pedagogy. And pedagogy is like the study of how people learn, right? The study of how to teach information and how people acquire, learn information or adapt to it, use it, whatever. So a person who is engaged in teaching other people, the one thing that we can say without any more knowledge than that is that their specialty, their focus, what it is that they theoretically are dedicated to or going to be doing more with, is pedagogy, is the nature of how to teach and how people learn. Now, an English teacher or a math teacher or a law school professor or a parent or whatever, right? The specific content that we're teaching, the specific context in which we're teaching it, like that's also stuff that a math professor is, in addition to being experienced, and theoretically skilled at the process of conveying information or teaching people things, is also skilled with math itself, the subject, the content that they're teaching. Where a history professor could be just as familiar with and skillful at the process of teaching, but know nothing about math, but know a lot about history, right? So when I'm saying that therapists and coaches, our specialty is communication, that's what I'm talking about. Is the one thing you can say about someone who's a therapist or a coach confidently without any additional information is that what they're doing is communicating with people. They're interacting with other people. The specific things that they're communicating about and the specific techniques they use and the specific outcomes they're trying to generate through that communication, that's going to change from person to person depending on their specialties, depending on their worldviews, what they believe about things, right? That what I believe about neurodiversity, for example, is diametrically opposed to what some other people believe about whether it's various disorders or just the nature of how people end up thinking and feeling and behaving the way that they do. And it's not to say that I or any individual person can identify like one way is right or best and another way is wrong or terrible. Although, certainly I think it's useful to go through that process. Whether we can 100% like prove or know for certain that like one approach is better than another approach is separate from the fact that it's obviously useful to evaluate like what do we think about this approach, that worldview, that technique, whatever, where it might be helpful, where it might be harmful, etc. So yeah, that's our specialty, is communication. And then in addition to that, it's whatever else we do. And all of that, remember, wherever you go, there you are. All of that is filtered through our perception, our worldview, our, the way in which we think and feel and respond to things. I've been trying to practice approaching conversations with more curiosity, looking for ways to ask, what do you mean by that? Or could you tell me more? I can get in the habit of trying to act like I know what someone is talking about before I'm certain, because it makes me seem quicker on the uptake. Yes, I love all of that. That is generally something. I want to be clear that there's no such thing as like everything that we're talking about, every piece of advice or every suggestion or understanding that I am talking about, as well as anything anybody else, expert, not expert, whatever, anything else talking about, they're all options. They're all tools. They're things that you can adopt and utilize, at least theoretically, right? And so talking about them as tools is a useful metaphor, because what we want to think of is the way in which something works, what it helps with, and maybe why. If it's not always worth, like, I can use a jigsaw without understanding why the jigsaw is able to do what it does. But then if I'm trying to do certain kinds of things, go further into the field where a jigsaw would be useful, having a better understanding of why it does it, what it does is useful. But it means I miss opportunities to learn and understand another person better. Yeah, when we try to seem quicker on the uptake, yeah, we lose on opportunities to learn. So I want to be clear that all of these are tools, and like any tool, at best, a tool is useful in some circumstances. The most useful tool, still, if you use it for something for which it is not intended or useful, because tools can have useful utility beyond what they were originally intended to have. But if there are inherent limits, right? A hammer is a great tool for driving nail into wood. And if you try to use it to cut a piece of wood in half, it's a terrible tool. It's likely to result in injury and damaging materials, and very unlikely to result, pretty much impossible that it will result in what you're trying to accomplish. So if we identify things as like, it's better to do this, without the context of like, in what cases or when you're trying to accomplish what thing is this useful, then we end up over applying things. Humans, this is called generalizing. We generalize everything. We take a lesson we learned, we did this one thing one time and it helped, and we apply it to like anything that in any way seems similar or connected to that time at work. And just through a process of experience, we learn like, okay, that did or did not work. Now, the more curious you are, meaning the more you're dedicating some of your attention to taking in information from outside, then the faster you're likely to learn to go through that process, right? That I tried using this tool for this thing and it did not go well. If I pay close attention to that, I'm more likely to be like, okay, that there's clearly a limit here of that tool, even though I thought it would be useful here, it isn't. And I'm more likely to put together patterns more quickly and adapt. Whereas the less curious I am, and oftentimes this is where we'll use the word stubborn, where meaning instead of my attention going to observing the results of what's happening, my attention is going towards my own ideas of what would happen or should happen if I were to X, right? If I believe that using a hammer to cut a piece of wood in half will be good, then when I do it, if I'm paying attention to what's happening, I get information immediately that's saying like, nope, I was wrong. This is not working the way that I thought it would. If instead, though, I'm mostly focused on my ideas and beliefs about things, either about this or just anything else, I'm not taking in information about this, I'm more likely to just keep trying it longer before realizing that this isn't working. So curiosity in general is a good thing, but not always. There are times when like, no, it's actually advantageous to be paying more attention to your own thoughts about things, including your thoughts about other things that aren't currently happening. Or if we talk about curiosity in a different way, where we're saying, instead of curiosity being like about trying to learn more generally, well, sometimes it's better to try and teach or use information than to learn it. So just like any other tool, it has times where it's more effective and less effective. That's fair. There are some people I talk with where I'm perfectly happy with the amount of curiosity I bring to a conversation, right? Yeah. At the end of the day, we're limited. We have finite resources. We can only do so much, right? And this is like an existential philosophy or existential therapy thing, but there's something called universal fear of isolation. This idea that like, no matter what, I will never be able to fully 100% with all the nuance and detail actually be aware of what's going on in somebody else's mind and their subjective internal experience. And vice versa also. No matter what I do, I will never be able to get somebody else to have the exact awareness of what's going on inside of me. And when we think about it in that level of detail, it makes us sad. That's why we call it the fear of isolation. But for the most part, it doesn't matter, because that's not the point of communication, is to have 100% like the same experiences or awareness. It's to communicate in order for us to be able to handle something, right? To navigate the world in some way. So if the extent of our interaction is you're selling something and I'm buying it, then really it only matters that we're communicating well enough in regards to like what I need to give to you and what you need to give to me, and then we're done. So it's not worth, in that case, and I'm not saying that it's not fun or enjoyable or even like nice or valuable to learn about everybody. It's just not possible to learn about everybody. So I'm not saying that when I buy something from someone, they are not a person of interest to me, or there's no point in trying to understand or communicate or learn anything about them. I'm saying that every resource you spend on learning about that person is a resource you can't spend on learning about another person. So whether we like it or not, we're doing this non-conscious arithmetic basically all the time, assessing where it's best to put our resources. So obviously I, for example, am married. It's a very common, I'm going to say confidently, like the most common way that humans have gone about their lives is to do pair bonding. And that obviously, like, that means that investing in understanding and communicating with my spouse is very valuable, because we're likely to be communicating and interacting with each other again in the future, where somebody that I see and interact with once, it's not worth as much, at least in theory. Just scroll up to see this. I'm kind of struggling with that balance now with a D&D game. There's a person who takes up a lot of narrative space, and I can get kind of defensively stubborn about my own perspectives because of it. I'm trying to work out how much I want to accommodate and how valuable it is for me to stand my ground. That's probably a confusing way to describe it. I wouldn't say confusing. The general idea makes sense to me, but it's a fairly vague, and I assume that's on purpose. And also we're going to wrap up in a few minutes here. But it just doesn't have a lot of specifics about what they're doing or what you're doing. But just the general, like, this is a social, what's the word I'm looking for? This is something that happens in social interaction that people are generally aware of. That, like, how much someone takes attention, takes space, how we have different ways of talking about it. And we all kind of do our own assessments of, like, am I talking too much? Am I taking too much space? Am I not speaking up enough? You know, how much is the right amount? I think that's, to some extent, that's how I'm interpreting what you're saying, is that there's a person who is both taking more attention in the fact that they're like talking more and whatever, but also exerting influence to make things go more the way that they would find enjoyable, and paying less attention than you think is optimal to what other people might find enjoyable. Yeah, kind of vague on purpose, because explaining would take a stream or two. That's fair. And we can. FYI, I will not be here for the stream next week. I will be out. Hopefully Margaret will do it. I'll talk with her to find out for sure, but I will be back in 2 weeks. I think the most I can simplify this concept is to say it's like any kind of investment, right? That the more that you think something might pay off, the more you're willing to invest into it. And there's a lot that goes into that evaluation of like how likely is something to pay off, or how much. Some of that, especially when it comes to relationships and communication, some of that is like, how much will I interact with this person over time? The more that I think it's likely that we're going to talk more, the more it's worth investing into us communicating more efficiently and effectively and understanding one another better. Some of that is about intensity, that like, even though I'm only going to interact with this person one time, depending on the results of that interaction, they might like save my life or kill me or whatever, right? And that's something where, in that case, we're often talking in real terms. It's not common generally that there's like, I could die or have my life saved. More commonly, we're talking about like business and professional interactions with people. You know, you have a job interview, and the result of this interview is a big deal. Or you're starting a company and you want to get investors, and the result of that is a big deal. Um, Even if you're not going to interact with that person again, right? So we put more preparation into that or give it greater weight. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. It's not just about the context, it's also on the other end. It's like, if I evaluate that what this person, I could get a lot out of this relationship, but in order to do that, I would have to do X, Y, or Z or impact them in this way. And I don't think I really can accomplish that, even if I try very hard. Then I'm less likely to invest into it than if I'm like, well, I think I can impact them in that way and therefore get those benefits of that relationship. I'm more likely to try. In general, I think it's good to just start always by observing, instead of this idea that like there is some identifiably optimal way to go about things. Start with just, how am I doing things? That kind of curiosity. What is happening? Mindfulness talks about this a lot. But like, I notice with this person, I am jumping in more. With this person, I don't try as hard to understand, and being curious from that perspective. Because the D&D game you're talking about, it's a collaborative endeavor. Multiple people working together, trying to accomplish something that can't be accomplished by any of those people independently. I think part of the calculus here is I've been playing this D&D campaign with this person for years now, and will probably continue playing with them for a long time. So in that case, it's more worth trying to communicate and work through these things. Now, I understand that I'm not sure that this is what you're saying. I think it's part of what you're getting at, but I could be wrong. Even if it's not what you're saying, this is something that happens a lot, is then people become more afraid of causing problems, right? We're going to be working together for a long time, so I don't want to like get in an argument or do something that upsets them or causes difficulty between us, because then we're going to have to still interact with each other and it will be more difficult. That, of course, happens and is something that we need to take into consideration. We do take into consideration. But I would say that the more that you're likely to interact with somebody, like the more likely it is that you are going to be interacting with somebody a lot in the future, the more valuable it becomes to find a way to communicate about things instead of just sitting on them, right? It's a lot easier to like bite my tongue when somebody's doing something that I think, that's upsetting to me, when I'm at a party and I'm at the end of this party, I'll never see this person again. Where if it's like, oh, this is, I don't know, my spouse or sibling or colleague that I'm going to see every day, it's a lot harder to bite your tongue forever and ever, right? So it's difficult and risky, but more important, more valuable to try and find ways to be able to communicate about it. That is where a lot of like general thoughts and advice on navigating situations like this in our culture at this point is very combative. But she also has limited spell slots, both because she's a paladin and also because she has long COVID. Sure. Those are things, well, the first one's just funny and a joke. The second one is it's something that is valid and important to take into consideration, because it plays into what tactics are likely to result in helpful versus harmful things, right? That like, imagine I'm a personal trainer and I'm working with someone who's trying to get stronger. Knowing like what their limits are is very important. So, because if I push too much, too hard, like it's likely that I injure the person or hurt the person, or we don't get any benefit and the whole thing falls apart. And if I don't push enough, then we also still don't get any benefit out of it, right? So we want to identify like how much can people afford to be able to do and work within those parameters. So it's important to take that into consideration, but not to take it into consideration to the extent that you're saying, and therefore I won't do anything or nothing will ever be done. Not that that's never true. Sometimes people's limitations are that like there's enough other stuff going on. This is a low enough priority that there will never be room to do anything here. But even in that case, that still means that you're facing now like, so I just deal with this level of discomfort or whatever the problem is with this forever. which is not something I would generally recommend, especially when there are other options, which can make conversations a little more complicated. Absolutely can make things more complicated. But the other thing about being in a relationship where you're like more confident that we are going to interact with each other over time is that we don't have to accomplish it all at once, right? We can do little things here and there. We can plant a seed, right? If I'm living in a place where I'm confident I'm going to be living in this place for the next 30 years, then doing a little thing one day that's not going to like pay off in any big way, but if I do it a little bit of it every day, then 10 years from now, it's going to be what I want it to be, is worth doing. So little things, we don't have to make it a big conversation, but we still want to look for little interactions, little things that we can do that might, including sometimes it's like, let me build up trust in this relationship, so that if and when I do get to a point of saying something that I'm concerned they will not like, or they will interpret, in some way differently than what I want. Right? Like if I'm interacting with someone for the first time and I say something that what I mean is very like well-intended and nice, but I say it in such a way that it comes across, it's interpreted as like a very mean jerk thing to say, then that person is very likely to just think, okay, this person's a mean jerk, and there's no point in trying to like talk to them or work it out, right? That all makes sense. If I do the same thing with my wife, then we have enough of a history, enough of a relationship, we're invested into each other enough that, not every time because we all slip and make our mistakes here and there, but by and large, if I say something that and she interprets as like, oh, he's being a real jerk to me right now, she's more likely to say that to me, like, oh, that sounds like you're being a real jerk, or you're being a real jerk, and give me the opportunity to, oh, I'm sorry, I see how that came across, but this is what I meant, right? So building the trust, the parameters of the relationship in such a way that makes it more likely that, if they think what you're saying is rude or mean, they'll give you an opportunity to know that they interpreted you that way and to repair it. So sometimes that work day after day is about like building the relationship, building the trust, and then trying to bring up other things later when I'm more confident that we'll be able to work through it if there's a problem. She takes up narrative space because she has a very reactive character with a black and white mentality who has also been handed a main character type buff. She's socially anxious and tries hard to not make decisions for the group, but her playstyle is still very different from mine, and the circumstances of the campaign make it so her decisions have a bit of an outsized influence. Oh, now see, this is more specific, and I want to say more specific things, but we have to wrap up. So maybe 2 weeks from now, we could talk about this more, because some of that, as it gets more specific, I can make more specific or offer more specific thoughts. And some of that I would say is worth discussing with the DM for why they're setting it up in this way. It might be deliberate and purposeful that they're putting her in that position, but it might just be something that they don't even realize. They might think that you're enjoying it and not know that you're not. So that might be worth talking about. And there's also with this particular thing, so no, not therapy next week. I don't know. I neglected to talk with Margaret in advance about whether she'll do it while I'm gone, so I can't say. But I hope that it'll happen next week just without me, and I'll be back in 2 weeks. But I can't say for sure that it will. But yeah, this specific thing, there's also options for both in character and out of character, right? Like there are things that could change about your character or the way that you play your character that could help resolve some of this. And there are things that could be about communicating out of character with the other player or with the DM that could resolve some of this. Interesting, and we can talk about it in the future. She made character decisions in a previous campaign that just happened to line up very well in this campaign. So as someone who sometimes DMs, I'll say that like, I think there's a decent chance that maybe what you're referring to, there's at least some chance that what you're referring to is like, there's narrative constructions here where that character fits narratively with something the DM is trying to do, but the DM isn't evaluating it on a functional level of what that does to the player or to the experience of the play group or the session. That sometimes there's a player that doesn't want to role play, and if their character is constructed, oh, they're from this place and this plot device that I was going to do, like it would work really well if, because they're from that place, they're at the center of this thing. That can all make sense narratively and work really well. But then if you structure it and put it in a position where that person has to do a lot of role playing, then that still doesn't make it for a better game, even though it makes for a better narrative. So anyway, complicated situation that could take a long time to explain. Fair enough. It's all, yes. Good to be with you all. I will see you in a couple weeks. Be well.